This is the tale of two zero-tolerance policies, one regarding immigration, the other regarding gun policy. Today we're going to talk about the fights against each of these policies, one during the Biden era and the other more recently under the Trump administration. And there have been two very different approaches from the DOJ in each of these administrations. I'm Phil and you're watching Law and Ammo. As you may have heard, the Department of Justice is now opposing us in our one big beautiful lawsuit. Our fight against the NFA just got that much harder. Thankfully, at GOA, we're no strangers to doing the work and fighting for the Second Amendment. Please consider becoming a member to help us take down the NFA. So let's free short-barrel firearms, AOWs, and suppressors from the NFA's registration requirements. Now back to the video. Way back on May 7th, 2018, the first Trump administration announced a self-described zero-tolerance immigration enforcement policy. The zero-tolerance policy provided for the separation of children from families who had crossed the U.S. border illegally. Obviously, this didn't sit well with the pro-illegal immigration ACLU, which challenged the so-called zero-tolerance policy in a lawsuit, Miss L v. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Then, following media outrage and a change in enforcement priorities, the Trump administration attempted to moot the case and ultimately rescind its family separation policy via executive order on June 20th, 2018. Even so, the district court kept the ACL suit alive, certifying it as a class action and preliminarily enjoining the Trump administration from conducting future separations. In the years that followed, district court proceedings continued in Miss L v. ICE, and the case was still alive through the change in presidential administrations from Trump to Biden in 2021. But then, with its friends now in power, the ACLU's strategy changed. Armed with a new Biden administration friendly to its cause, the ACLU and its Biden allies jointly informed the district court that the parties have agreed to enter into settlement negotiations. Just what were those settlement negotiations, you might be asking? Well, the ACLU and the Biden administration entered into a court-approved settlement agreement barring the federal government from reenacting the zero-tolerance immigration policy over the next 8 years or until late 2031. In other words, the Biden administration inherited an ongoing lawsuit challenging a Trump-era policy it opposed. And rather than attempting to simply moot the case, it saw an opportunity. And so the Biden DOJ entered into a binding settlement with an allied advocacy organization to codify a lasting left-wing victory against the federal government. Then adding insult to injury, the Biden administration agreed to pay its good friends at the ACLU a staggering $6 million in attorney's fees right before the 2024 election. That's how the Biden administration treated its political allies. Here's a favorable judgment plus $6 million for your troubles. But contrast this Biden DOJ cooperation with its political allies with the current hostile treatment of the DOJ's political allies. And so now we turn to the second zero-tolerance case. In 2022, the Biden administration promulgated its own self-described zero-tolerance policy. But this one had nothing to do with immigration. Rather, this zero-tolerance policy was aimed at gun dealers engaged in protected Second Amendment commerce. The intent was clear: put as many gun stores out of business as possible. And naturally, just like the ACLU had challenged President Trump on immigration, GOA filed a lawsuit challenging this Biden ATF policy against gun dealers. The case was called Morehouse Enterprises v. ATF. Now you might think that the current DOJ would have supported GOA's challenge to the Biden zero-tolerance policy. After all, the Biden DOJ had supported the ACLU's challenge to President Trump's zero-tolerance policy. But if you thought that, you'd be wrong. Very wrong. In fact, in spite of several Trump officials criticizing the Biden zero-tolerance ATF policy as unlawful and unconstitutional, GOA is not receiving the same treatment from this DOJ that Biden gave to the ACLU. Quite the contrary, GOA's position of an in-court settlement was not received well by this DOJ, and this could have stopped future administrations from simply reimposing a zero-tolerance regime for firearm license revocations. So rather Rather than reporting to the courts that the parties have entered into settlement negotiations like they did in Miss L v. ICE, the DOJ argued to the courts that GOA's case was moot. And in doing so, the DOJ lawyers actually argued in defense of the Biden-era infringement. In other words, not only did this DOJ's lawyers refuse to settle, in fact, they continue to defend Biden's anti-gun policy. In court, the DOJ even went so far as saying that there's no reason to think that ATF will repeat the behavior.
By rescinding and replacing the challenge guidance, ATF has given plaintiffs all the relief they could hope for in this case, and this appeal should be dismissed as moot.
What do we say about the fact that it was the first Trump administration that did it? It's the second that's reversing. What's to say, still 3+ more years to change again?
I just don't think there's any plausible basis in the record for thinking that the ATF is going to do that, Your Honor. And so I don't think there's any basis for believing that the conduct the plaintiffs are challenging is going to occur, and certainly not in the foreseeable future. Again, I just don't think there's any basis for thinking that ATF is going to do that at any point.
But here's the thing. Every gun owner knows that without a binding precedent from the courts, ATF will absolutely be right back to their objective of zero tolerance the second that some Democrat president gets into the White House. And never mind attorney's fees. The DOJ has opposed payment of even a small amount in fees in another of GOA's winning cases regarding bump stocks. But this leads to the question of why. Why won't the DOJ work with us as willing allies to bind the federal government and ATF from infringing on gun owners' rights in the future? We can't say for sure, but there's no reason that a pro-gun Department of Justice would be willing to fight like this to preserve the Biden-era status quo. But what can you do about it? Well, there's actually a lot. We're currently fighting the DOJ's attempts to moot our other cases. And we're asking our members, like you, to call the White House at 202-456-1111 and urge the DOJ to work with GOA, not against us, to secure the Second Amendment for gun owners for decades to come. We're going to keep you updated on this situation as it develops. Thanks for watching.